A small nation, long dismissed by the powerful, suddenly stood tall. A young soldier in a red beret refused to kneel before billionaires, bankers, and empires. His name, Ibrahim Traoré. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it with the world, because what you're about to hear is more than a story. It's a turning point in history. This is not just Burkina Faso's story. It is Africa's story. It is the story of defiance, betrayal, and sacrifice, and of a vision bold enough to redraw the future of a continent. Stay with us, because once you hear how it began, you'll understand why the world will never be the same again. The world had always laughed at Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation of red earth and hunger, too small to matter, too poor to resist, too forgotten to dream. For decades, its name was a footnote in reports about poverty and instability. And yet, in 2025, this overlooked country stood at the edge of a transformation that would shake billionaires, presidents, and empires alike. At the center of it was a young soldier with a red beret and unyielding eyes, Ibrahim Traoré. He was not born into wealth, nor educated in the grand universities of the West. He came from the same dust that his people walked on, carrying their hunger, their exhaustion, their broken hopes inside him. But where others had surrendered, he chose to fight. His announcement had been simple, almost unbelievable. Burkina Faso will open its doors to Africa. Our economy will grow by our hands. Justice will no longer serve the powerful but the people. It was a declaration that defied centuries of dependency. The reaction was swift. In Washington, London, and Paris, analysts shook their heads. Naive, they called him. In New York, traders whispered of risks to the global markets. And in the hidden boardrooms of the world's wealthiest, the words were heavier, dangerous. For behind the politicians were the billionaires, the true architects of the modern world. Oil barons, tech giants, financial titans. They saw Traoré not as a curiosity but as a threat. If one small African nation could reject the order of dependency, what stopped others from following? What stopped a continent from breaking free? Among these billionaires sat a man whose name was etched into every conversation about the future, Elon Musk. Unlike the others, he did not dismiss Traoré. He watched him closely, intrigued by the audacity. Musk had built rockets to pierce the skies, cars to reshape roads, networks to connect millions. But here was a soldier in Africa, daring to redraw the rules of nations. To Musk, this was not recklessness. It was history knocking on the door. Still, most of the world expected Traoré to fall. They expected chaos at his borders, collapse in his markets, rebellion in his courts. They expected him to bend, to apologize, to vanish like so many African leaders before him. The whispers were cruel. He's too young, too poor, too alone. But the people of Burkina Faso whispered something different. In crowded markets and dimly lit homes, they repeated his words with trembling hope. Mothers prayed that the promise of justice would protect their children. Traders dreamed of roads filled with new opportunities. Soldiers spoke of defending something larger than orders, defending dignity. And as the sun bled across the Sahel, Ibrahim Traoré tightened the strap of his uniform, his red beret shadowing determined eyes. He knew the world was watching, waiting for him to fail. But what he would do next would not just defy their predictions, it would stun even the richest men alive. The streets of Ouagadougou carried the scent of dust and roasted corn as the news spread like fire. Burkina Faso was no longer just another struggling state. It was the center of a storm. The announcement had been made, bold and irreversible. Free visas for all Africans, economic reforms rooted in independence, and a justice system that would no longer bend to corruption. For most of the world, it sounded like a fantasy, a speech meant to stir hearts but doomed to collapse under reality. But inside Burkina Faso, something shifted. Markets filled with strangers who no longer felt like foreigners. Traders from Mali, Ghana, and Niger arrived with carts and goods, testing the new open border. Farmers brought their harvests across boundaries once guarded by armed men, and for the first time in decades, people spoke of movement without fear. The reforms touched something deeper than policy. They touched the soul of Africa. For generations, borders had been drawn with European rulers, slicing through tribes, cultures, and families. Now, in this small country, long dismissed as powerless, those invisible walls were beginning to fall. Children who once needed documents to see their cousins across a river walked freely with laughter in their voices. The hope was fragile, but it was real. Ibrahim Traoré walked the streets in his military uniform, the red beret casting shade over his steady gaze. He did not hide behind palaces or glass towers. He visited markets, listened to vendors, ate with farmers. His presence was a declaration. Leadership was not distance, but closeness. The people loved him for it, and that love became the shield he carried into battle against forces far larger than himself. But shadows lengthened quickly. Inside the halls of power in Europe and America, analysts warned of instability. Headlines called him reckless. Former colonial officials spoke of a dangerous precedent. And in skyscraper boardrooms from New York to Dubai, billionaires discussed him with unease. The ultra-wealthy had always shaped Africa's story. Oil magnates dictated energy, financiers dictated loans, tech giants dictated communication. To them, a small soldier from Burkina Faso rewriting the rules was not just annoying, it was a threat to the structure they had built over decades. Meetings were called. Names known across the world, men who commanded trillions in capital, spoke in hushed tones. Some argued for sanctions, others for covert action. The language was clinical, but the intent was sharp. Contain Traoré before his ideas spread. Amid them was Elon Musk. Unlike the others, he did not mock. He listened. In Traoré, he saw the same refusal to accept limits that had driven him to launch rockets, build electric empires, and dream of colonizing Mars. But this was different. This was a soldier in Africa daring to bend history itself. Musk leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. "He's not dangerous because of what he's done," he said softly. "He's dangerous because of what he makes people believe is possible." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré faced enemies not only abroad but within. Corrupt businessmen, long accustomed to bribing officials, began to resist the justice reforms. Judges whispered in private rooms, fearing the end of their privileges. Even some generals grew restless, worried that the open borders would bring chaos. To them, stability had always meant control. Traoré's vision threatened their grip. But among ordinary people, his reforms were already bearing fruit. Young men who once dreamed only of leaving for Europe now spoke of opening businesses at home. Women formed cooperatives across borders, sharing resources and ideas. For the first time in living memory, people felt as though Africa was not just a continent of nations, but a single body beginning to breathe again. Traoré knew the danger was rising. He worked through sleepless nights, reviewing reports by candlelight when the power cut out, walking with his people to hear their voices directly. Each decision was a gamble, each step forward risked collapse. Yet he pressed on, driven by a simple conviction. A free Africa was worth the fight. The West tightened its grip. Banks quietly began to restrict Burkina Faso's access to credit. International media painted him as a dictator in waiting. NGOs pulled funding, warning of human rights concerns. And in the dark, whispers grew louder. Rumors of cyber attacks, financial blockades, and infiltration. At a private gathering in Geneva, billionaires from every sector assembled. They spoke not in public speeches, but behind closed doors. A tall man with silver hair declared, "If Burkina Faso succeeds, Africa will see itself differently." That cannot happen. Another argued for immediate intervention. Some demanded harsher measures, destabilization, funding opposition, even removal. Musk sat among them, silent until pressed. "You're all looking at this wrong," he finally said. "You think stopping him keeps the world the same. But the world is already changing. You just don't want to admit it." His words unsettled the room. Some rolled their eyes, dismissing him as eccentric. Others listened, deeply troubled. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, the tension tightened like a rope. Traoré could feel it. Every day his choices carried heavier consequences. He was not only fighting for reforms, he was fighting against centuries of an invisible empire that thrived on African weakness. The question was no longer if the billionaires would strike, but when, and as night fell over Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré stood at his window, his silhouette framed against the Sahel sky. His red beret rested on the table beside him, worn from the weight of long days. The path ahead was dark, filled with betrayals he could not yet see. But deep in his chest a fire burned steady. The world expected him to break. Instead, he was preparing to rise. The first blow came quietly, almost invisibly. One morning, banks in Burkina Faso found themselves locked out of international payment systems. Transactions froze, letters of credit were revoked, and within hours, traders who had just begun to celebrate the open borders were staring at collapsed deals. The markets shook, not from within, but from levers pulled thousands of miles away. This was no accident. It was strategy. Across the Atlantic, financial titans toasted their first move. "Cut the arteries and the body will weaken," one whispered at a Manhattan dinner table. "Starve them, and the people will turn on him." The plan was clear. Isolate Traoré, choke his economy, and let desperation do what bullets could not. But they underestimated the soil they were dealing with. Inside Burkina Faso, people had long grown used to surviving with little. Where others would panic, they adapted. Farmers hoarded their harvests, markets turned to barter, and communities pulled together. Traoré toured the villages, urging patience. His uniform was dusty, his voice steady. "They think hunger will break us. They don't understand. We have known hunger before. And still, we stand." Yet behind his calm tone, he felt the pressure. Each report delivered to his desk carried new crises: fuel shortages, medical supplies delayed, businesses collapsing. The West was tightening its grip, and shadows of betrayal moved closer within his own ranks. And then came the smear campaign. Headlines screamed across. Western networks: Burkina Faso's strongman threatens stability. Commentators painted him as a dictator in disguise, a military thug hiding behind populist slogans. Photos of soldiers patrolling borders were twisted into narratives of brutality. NGOs published reports, often without evidence, claiming abuses. The goal was simple: strip away his legitimacy, turn allies into skeptics, and make the world see him as a danger, not a reformer. But the people inside Burkina Faso saw through it. In crowded cafes, men shook their heads at foreign broadcasts. Mothers watching their children cross borders without checkpoints laughed at the lies. "Dictator?" One woman spat into the dust. "Dictators take from us. He gives." Still, the attacks escalated. A series of mysterious power outages struck Ouagadougou. Hospitals went dark, water pumps froze, and panic rippled through the city. Experts soon confirmed what Traoré already suspected: cyber sabotage. Somewhere far beyond their borders, unseen fingers were pulling switches, testing his resilience. The young leader gathered his council late into the night. Candles flickered across a wooden table, scarred by years of use. Generals demanded harsher crackdowns. Businessmen urged compromise. Traoré listened, then spoke slowly, his voice carrying both fatigue and resolve. "If we bow now, they will own us forever. Better to fall standing than live crawling." But not everyone in the room agreed. Whispers of betrayal grew louder, and the scent of treachery hovered. Meanwhile, in Silicon Valley and Dubai, the billionaires sharpened their tools. They spoke of correcting Burkina Faso, of restoring order. Plans for covert funding of opposition movements began. Lobbyists pushed for embargoes. A campaign of economic strangulation unfolded like a chess match, and yet among them, one man broke ranks: Elon Musk. From his headquarters, Musk followed each report obsessively. While others saw Traoré as a problem, he saw an experiment worth defending. The courage to open borders, to ignite economic independence, to challenge the IMF and entrenched corruption. It mirrored his own battles against industries that once laughed at him. In private conversations, Musk began signaling quiet support. Starlink terminals arrived in Burkina Faso, discreetly donated, giving communities internet access when sabotage tried to silence them. Renewable energy projects were announced, small at first, but symbolically massive. His voice carried weight, and when he hinted publicly that Burkina Faso may be leading Africa into a new era, the world listened. The reaction was electric. Western officials fumed. Media outlets scrambled to dismiss him. "Musk backs African strongman," headlines sneered. But inside Africa, the effect was the opposite. Hope spread. If a man who launched rockets and built electric empires could see value in Traoré's dream, Perhaps it was not madness after all. The billionaires doubled their efforts. Anonymous cyber attacks intensified. Burkina Faso's fragile economy was hit with speculative waves designed to sink its currency. Rumors of assassination plots surfaced, convoys targeted, meetings infiltrated, strange faces spotted near government compounds. Each day carried the taste of danger, and yet ordinary Africans continued to move across borders, carrying the fire of unity with them. A merchant in Ghana told his children, "We are no longer trapped." A farmer in Niger whispered, "The map is no longer our prison." They moved, they traded, they believed. It was this belief that terrified the powerful most. Not Traoré's reforms themselves, but the ripple effect, the idea that one small nation could make others dream bigger. Late one night, as the Sahel winds howled against the windows of the presidential compound, Traoré stood alone. His beret rested on the desk before him, his reflection dark against the glass. He knew the billionaires would not stop. They had endless money, endless reach. He had only his people, their resilience, and his own resolve. The clash ahead would not be fought on battlefields with guns and tanks. It would be fought in markets, in networks, in mines. A war without bullets, but with stakes just as lethal. And as he closed his eyes, one question lingered, heavy and sharp. How long before they struck openly? How long before the shadows turned into fire? The rising storm was coming, and Ibrahim Traoré would soon find himself at the very center of it. The storm broke without warning. At dawn, the banks of Ouagadougou woke to panic. Every digital account frozen, every credit line erased. Traders screamed into dead terminals, businesses collapsed overnight, and the fragile flow of goods across the newly opened borders screeched to a halt. It wasn't just pressure this time, it was a full-blown siege. The billionaires had unleashed their arsenal. Across Europe and America, corporate boardrooms celebrated. Hedge funds shorted Burkina Faso's currency to dust. Speculators bet on its collapse, and private mercenaries were quietly hired under the cover of security contracts. To the West, this was not reform, it was rebellion, and rebellion had to be crushed. But Traoré refused to bow. Standing before the nation in his military uniform, red beret tilted defiantly, he declared, "They have stolen our money, but they cannot steal our dignity. They have locked their gates, but we have opened ours. Let them choke us, we will breathe together," the crowd roared. But behind the cheers lurked hunger, fear, and uncertainty. The attacks intensified. Grain shipments destined for Burkina Faso were mysteriously rerouted. Fuel tankers caught fire in accidents along their journey. Cyber attacks multiplied, bringing government networks to their knees. In the streets, whispers of sabotage grew. Men in expensive suits were seen meeting shadowy figures at night. And then came the strike no one saw coming. One evening, as families gathered for prayers, the lights across the capital went black. Not a flicker, not a surge, total darkness. Within seconds, hospitals, schools, and homes were paralyzed. Panic swept through Ouagadougou. Babies wailed in incubators, water pumps froze, and silence smothered the city. It was a cyber weapon unlike anything the region had seen before. Power grids, satellites, communication towers, crippled all at once. A message appeared across hijacked television screens: submit or fall. There is no other path. The fingerprints were obvious. The billionaires hired networks of hackers, funded by the richest men alive. Working in shadows, governments dared not acknowledge. But the blackout also triggered something they hadn't expected. From the countryside, caravans of villagers poured into the capital, carrying lanterns, candles, and food. Markets opened by torchlight. Doctors worked with flashlights strapped to their heads. Traders bartered with old coins and cattle. What was meant to cripple Burkina Faso instead revealed its most dangerous weapon: unity. And then, Musk made his move, while the blackout spread. Shipments of Starlink terminals arrived under military escort, flown in from undisclosed locations. Engineers scrambled to connect them, and within hours, pockets of the capital lit up again with internet access. Musk himself posted one sentence to the world: "Burkina Faso will not go dark." The tweet shook the earth. Within minutes, millions of Africans across the continent flooded social media, sharing images of Burkina Faso's resilience. Children studying under candlelight, soldiers guarding borders in silence, farmers sharing food across fences. The blackout, instead of breaking them, had turned into a beacon. Western capitals fumed. Lobbyists demanded sanctions on Musk's companies. Politicians denounced him as reckless, destabilizing, irresponsible. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Burkina Faso was no longer a small nation being strangled. It was David staring down Goliath. The billionaires doubled down. They unleashed private armies, slipping them across borders disguised as contractors. Explosions rocked remote villages, fueling fear. Foreign agents spread rumors of coups, promising soldiers vast sums if they betrayed their leader. Traoré's intelligence networks intercepted messages, but the threat was real. An inside betrayal could end it all. In the presidential compound, tension cracked the air. Generals argued for striking back. Ministers demanded deals. Traoré listened, silent, his beret shadowing his eyes. Finally, he spoke, voice firm. They want us to sell our souls for food. They want us to betray our children for fuel. But hear me well, we will eat little, but it will be ours. We will walk far, but the road will be ours. If we fall, it will be standing. The words electrified the council. But outside, the war raged on. A massive cyber strike hit again. This time targeting not just Burkina Faso, but neighboring nations who had joined its open border pact. Ghana, Mali, Niger, each staggered as their economies flickered. The billionaires wanted to send a message: align with Traoré, and you will pay. Yet instead of splintering, the nations drew closer. A secret meeting was held at a dusty border town where leaders of the alliance gathered. There were no marble halls, no silk ties, just men and women seated beneath lanterns, sharing tea, deciding the fate of millions. We cannot stand alone, one leader said. If they isolate us, we must isolate them, another replied. Traoré leaned forward, eyes burning. Then let us build our own system. Not theirs. Not with their banks, not with their rules. Something new. Something ours. The pact was made that night. A new regional currency, trade routes independent of Western approval, and joint security forces to guard against mercenary incursions. What had begun as Burkina Faso's gamble was becoming a continental movement. The billionaires panicked. This was never supposed to happen. One leader defying them was dangerous enough, but an entire bloc of nations unified and defiant. That was a contagion. If Africa broke free, others might follow. And so, they planned their boldest strike yet. At midnight, a convoy of armored vehicles sped toward Ouagadougou, carrying mercenaries tasked with ending the rebellion in one swift blow. Their orders: eliminate Traoré, dismantle the government, install chaos, and call it regime change. But intelligence reached Traoré just in time. As the mercenaries approached the city, they were met not by soldiers but by thousands of civilians blocking the road. Men, women, and children, holding nothing but banners and torches, chanting his name, refusing to move. The mercenaries hesitated. Firing into the crowd would ignite an international firestorm, and in that hesitation, Burkinabe forces struck. Shots erupted, engines roared, chaos ripped the night. But when the smoke cleared, the mercenary column lay scattered. Their mission failed. The message was clear. Burkina Faso would not fall, and yet, even as the people celebrated, Traoré knew this was only the beginning. The billionaires would not accept defeat. They had too much to lose, too much pride, too much power invested in keeping nations like his under control. The war was shifting, accelerating, boiling towards something far greater than sanctions and sabotage. As the dawn rose over Ouagadougou, Traoré adjusted his red beret and stared eastward toward the horizon. His people were with him. Musk had placed his name beside his, and Africa itself was stirring awake. But the billionaires had not played their final card, and he knew the real battle was still to come. The world held its breath. For weeks, Burkina Faso had defied every blow: sanctions, cyber blackouts, mercenary raids, hunger, fear. Each strike was meant to break them, but instead, the people grew harder, sharper, more united. What began as Traoré's gamble had transformed into a continent-wide awakening, but the billionaires still believed they could bend history. Final meeting was held in a glass tower high above a western capital. The room gleamed with polished steel and arrogance. The richest of the rich sat in silence as their leader, a man whose fortune could buy nations, laid out the plan. If he will not kneel, we will erase him. Not through soldiers, not through sanctions, through the very people he claims to serve. The idea was insidious. Turn Burkina Faso's strength, its unity, into a weakness. Spread lies, plant rumors, create fractures in faith, religion, and ethnicity. Make the people believe Traoré had betrayed them. It was the oldest trick of empire, divide and conquer. And so the storm began again. Whispers spread in markets. Traoré was stealing gold for himself. Murmurs in mosques. He had cut deals with foreigners. Rumors in villages. He planned to sell land to outsiders. Within days, the lies began to bite. Fights erupted. Suspicion grew. The billionaires smiled. Chaos was cheaper than bullets. But what they underestimated was not Traoré's military. It was his people's memory. On the steps of the National Assembly, Traoré called the nation together. The sun burned above as tens of thousands gathered, filling every street, every rooftop. He stood in his uniform, red beret glinting, voice cutting like iron. They will tell you I have betrayed you. They will say I steal, that I sell, that I kneel. But you, he pointed to the crowd, you know the truth. Was it not your grain that fed your neighbors? Was it not your hands that lit the night when they cut the power? Was it not your children who stood on the roads to face their mercenaries? This fight is not mine, it is yours. They cannot divide us unless we let them. A roar rose, thunderous, unbroken. The lies dissolved like ash in fire. And then something extraordinary happened. From across Africa, leaders who had once hesitated began to step forward. Ghana announced free visas for Africans. Mali pledged to back a shared regional currency. Niger offered military cooperation. Within months, a bloc of nations stood firm. A new African coalition unshackled from Western dictates. And behind closed doors, other voices, once distant, whispered support. A call came from South America. Your courage inspires us. An envoy from Asia declared, we will trade on your terms. Not theirs, even whispers in Europe. What if they are right? The tide was turning. The billionaires panicked. Markets shook. Their banks, once almighty, felt tremors as nations began experimenting with bypassing their systems. Alternative routes of trade, barter, digital currencies, resource swaps sprouted like wildfire. What had seemed unthinkable was becoming unstoppable. And then the world watched as Elon Musk, standing beside Traoré at a global summit streamed live across continents, announced, from this day forward, my networks will support any nation that chooses sovereignty. No country should be held hostage by a handful of men with money. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Hashtags spread like sparks. Musk had crossed a line no billionaire before him dared. He wasn't just enabling Burkina Faso, he was siding against his own class. The other tycoons fumed, calling him a traitor. But the damage was irreversible. For the first time, a man with their wealth had chosen principle over profit, and the symbolism was devastating. Still, Traoré knew it was not over. One evening, alone in his office, he stared at a map of Africa lit by a dim lamp. So many nations still under chains, so many leaders still too afraid, so many people still waiting for something better. His aide entered quietly. Sir, the world is watching. They are asking, what now? Traoré touched his beret, eyes narrowing. Now? Now we rise, and rise they did. Across the continent, people marched with Burkina Faso flags alongside their own. Songs praising Sankara were reborn with Traoré's name. Young Africans spoke not of fleeing to Europe, but of staying to build. Farmers began pooling resources, traders linking across borders, engineers sketching blueprints for African-made machines. For the first time in generations, hope did not feel like a dream. It felt like a plan. Meanwhile, in Western capitals, the silence was deafening. Politicians who once threatened Traoré now spoke carefully, calculatingly, realizing their grip was slipping. The billionaires still plotted, still schemed, but something deeper was shifting, something they could not reverse. Because what Traoré had built, was not just policy. It was not just free visas, stronger economies, or justice reforms. It was faith. Faith that Africa could belong to Africans. Faith that no empire was eternal. Faith that dignity was worth the struggle, even when the cost was hunger, fear, and sacrifice. And so, when the world asked what Burkina Faso's bold moves meant, the answer was not written in speeches or treaties. It was written in the faces of children walking to school without borders, in farmers selling grain across lines drawn by colonial rulers, in judges who ruled without fear of Western bribes. The struggle was not over. The billionaires would strike again. Empires never surrender without clawing back. But something had changed forever. And in the final voiceover of history, as the camera pulls away from a glowing Burkina Faso skyline lit with candles, solar panels, and laughter, the narrator whispers the question that now burns across continents. Is this the day Africa truly began to rise? Fade to black.